1066, the Norman Conquest and its French influence on the English language. On January 5th, 1066, the English king, Edward the Confessor, died. The very next day, the Anglo-Saxon lord, Harold Godwinson, had himself crowned king at Westminster Abbey. These two occurrences early in the year 1066 sparked a chain of events that would forever change our history of our world and our language. Duke William, there he is, of Normandy also claimed the English throne. The childless Edward the Confessor, who was William's first cousin, once removed, had made him a promise 15 years earlier. King Edward had chosen William to succeed him, overlooking Harold. In 1064, Harold Godwinson went to Normandy and was promptly arrested. William ordered his release and then used that as leverage to get Harold to swear allegiance to him. William's ancestors were Vikings who had arrived on the Normandy coast 2 centuries earlier. The city of Rouen was captured about 876 by the Norse leader, Rollo. In the ensuing years, the Vikings married French women and adopted French customs and language. Duke William, born in 1027, was the illegitimate son of Robert the Devil of Normandy and a mistress named Herleva. There were some in that day who called him William the Bastard, but just not to his face. William inherited Normandy from his father Robert, when Robert died during a return from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. The boy was crowned at age 8 in 1035, and with various nobles all vying for control of Normandy, William grew up in a bloody anarchy, escaping many attempts on his life. 3 of his protectors met grisly ends, and the young duke even witnessed one of his guardians murdered in his bedroom at night. Warned of yet another threat about 1045, William fled alone on horseback over 100 miles. Aided later by the French king, William then conquered the would-be assassins, and those guilty were massacred. Duke William was ruthless in his bid to control Normandy, demonstrated by his siege of the city Alençon, which is right at the bottom of the pink part. Having captured 32 men from an outlying garrison at Alençon, William had them blinded, had their hands and feet cut off, and then he catapulted the bodies into the city. The horrified city inhabitants promptly surrendered. Thus, by the age of 18, William had fought off all usurpers and taken personal control of Normandy. William was a burly man, 5'10" in height, with a guttural, commanding voice, and he was in excellent physical condition for most of his life. William chose as his bride-to-be Matilda of Flanders, daughter of Count Baldwin. At first, Matilda had no interest in the illegitimate duke, and she refused his hand. So William grabbed her by her long braids and pulled her down from the horse. This must have got her attention, for they were married about 1051. Pope Leo IX refused to acknowledge the union, as William and Matilda were distant 4th cousins. But the ceremony took place anyway. Contrary to the usual norms of that age, William and Matilda remained faithful to each other the rest of their lives. Matilda bore William at least 9 children, 4 sons and 5 daughters. 2 of the sons, William Rufus and Henry, were later to become kings of England. We now return to the events of 1066. By this time, William was reconciled with Rome and had even been giving a papal blessing. Pope Alexander II also gave him a cross banner, or a sort of flag, to carry in support of his claim to the English throne. Both William and Rome saw Harold as a usurper and a traitor. So now, with the Pope's blessing, William's planned invasion of England became a holy war. On his deathbed in January of 1066, King Edward had changed his mind and gave the throne to Harold instead of William. But the newly crowned King Harold had problems other than William. In early September that year, an invasion by Hardrada, king of Norway, compelled Harold to march north to challenge the Norse invaders. Harold's army defeated the Norwegians at Stamford Bridge on September 25th, near York. But then they had to quickly march back south to meet the new threat from William the Norman. Harold's forces were not rested or ready to wage war again so soon, especially after the forced march hundreds of miles down from the north. So from way up in York down to London and on. Harold arrived in London on October 6th and immediately marched his army south to meet William. During that spring and summer of 1066, William had amassed a great army of about 7,500 men, and he gathered a fleet of some 700 ships. Awaiting favorable winds for the crossing, the Normans set sail and landed on the English coast on September 28th. The French army was composed of about 4,000 infantry, 1,500 bowmen, and 2,000 mounted horsemen. The fatigued English army was of a similar size, but Harold's forces were mostly foot soldiers with shields and battle axes, standard Anglo-Saxon methods of warfare of the day. William embraced warfare of the future. He used armored knights on horseback, which were the armored tanks of that day. The two forces engaged at Senlac, near Hastings, on October 14th. The long, brutal battle began mid-morning and lasted 9 hours. The first casualty was Taillefer, William's court jester or minstrel. He had claimed the honor of the first charge. Taillefer rode out alone, brandishing his sword and screaming out challenges to the enemy lines. As he was engulfed by English troops, he went down singing merrily. Both sides employed archers and soldiers armed with battle axes, swords, and spears. Arrows and hand combat had little effect. The battle wavered back and forth for hours, deadlocked in a stalemate. The English walls of shields had resisted the Norman attacks. In late afternoon, William faked a retreat. Some of the English broke ranks and gave chase. In the melee, William's horse was killed and rolled on top of him. The Norman army thought him dead. Needing to turn the tide, William commandeered another horse and rode out, rallying his men. Taking off his helmet, the 38-year-old William shouted out, "I live! Fight or die!" His forces then surrounded and killed the English pursuers. The tide of battle had switched to favor the French. Around sunset, King Harold was killed by an arrow to the eye. This caused the English lines to crumple and flee, and ended the bloody conflict. Harold's death by an arrow is seen here, depicted in the Bayeux tapestry, which we will get to shortly. The Battle of Hastings left thousands dead. Some estimates say 2,000 Normans and 4,000 Englishmen perished that day. The victorious William methodically then marched his forces encircling the English capital, all the while burning, raping, and killing. By December, the great city of London surrendered to the Norman Duke. William had conquered England in 1066. The Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings caused the most radical and profound change in all of English history, affecting politics, language, lifestyles, in fact, all aspects of society. Many consider the Battle of Hastings the single most influential event in our history. Perhaps school children should memorize the year 1066, in addition to the usual 1492 we all learn and remember. William was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066. The next spring, William returned to Normandy, leaving his half-brother, Bishop Odo of Bayeux, as regent of England. Bishop Odo later commissioned the famous Bayeux tapestry, which tells the story of the Norman conquest in 58 scenes. The tapestry is actually an embroidered linen cloth, only 20 inches high, but stretching nearly 230 feet in length. The Bayeux tapestry tells the story of William, from his acceptance of the promise of the English throne from both Edward and Harold, to his amassing an army and a fleet and crossing the English Channel. It has scenes of battle, including Harold's death and William's accession to the throne. Its colorful depictions are still vibrant now after over 900 years. They show burning houses, screaming women, decapitated soldiers, and horses running amok amongst dead bodies. The tapestry even shows Halley's Comet, which appeared in the sky during the spring that year, 1066. The comet was called a long-haired star at that time. It terrified the people, but it was seen by William and his supporters as a good omen. The Bayeux tapestry is currently housed in a special museum room in the city of Bayeux, France, and it is considered perhaps the best artistic achievement remaining from the 11th century. Starting in September of next year, it will be closed to the public, but it will reopen in the spring of 2027 in a brand new museum, newly preserved with special lighting, controlled temperature, and a curved protective display case. Yet the history recorded in the Bayeux tapestry has been cleaned up a bit. There are no scenes showing Harold's army defeating the Norwegians right before Hastings, nor are there any depictions of the violence committed by William's troops right after Hastings as they rampaged through southern England. So now back to our story. Of course, King William had to defend his new conquest and title. There were uprisings by nobles and foreign threats from the Welsh and the Scots. He gradually solidified his control by erecting fortified castles all over England. Prior to 1066 and William, there were only 5 castles in England. But by the end of the 11th century, there were over 500. Castles such as Windsor, seen here. Oops, I'm bad, I'm not working here. There we go. And Windsor, there we go. Other castles, Oxford, Lincoln, Durham, Warwick, and over 400 others. Probably the best known of William's castles is the celebrated White Tower, the focal point of the famous Tower of London. In addition to building castles, another positive change attributed to King William was that he put an end to slavery. Prior to his reign, about 1 in 5 people were slaves. So this was a good change. Yet, in other respects, William was merciless. He put down domestic revolts cruelly, ruthlessly massacring any and all who resisted. He replaced hangings with a different sort of punishment. Criminals were blinded and castrated. In 1069, a small Norman force suffered a defeat in Durham. So William marched north through Yorkshire, allowing his men free rein to burn, pillage, and kill. Over 50,000 were killed outright. Referred to as the harrowing of the North, the Normans also destroyed livestock and crops, creating an artificial famine. Those who survived the initial onslaught succumbed slowly and miserably. Over 100,000 more people starved to death. It is estimated that his ravishing punishments of the North caused the lives of 10% of the total English population. Despite the horrors, religion and churches flourished. Great cathedrals such as Canterbury were rebuilt. William also established a new system of law and rules to protect his Norman French overlords. As William got older, he grew fat. His weight ballooned to an enormous size. During a 1087 dispute over some land, the French King Philip sent a message which said, "Is fat King William soon to give birth?" That same year, at a battle accident, let's see where we are here. I don't know what's wrong, but anyway, they'll be in the order that I practiced many, many times. Okay. That year, in a battle accident near Paris, William's intestines ruptured when severely poked by the pommel horn of his horse's saddle. The suffering, corpulent William was taken to the priory in Rouen, in France. There's the humor, okay. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, there he repented his cruelty to the English people. He released prisoners and set aside funds for the church and the poor. A contemporary of William, a monk named Orderic, recorded what has become an epitaph to the king. It is fitting, especially from the perspective of the English people. Now the slide is supposed to say in big letters, "I'm sorry." I don't know where that slide is now. Okay, we'll go on. In the words of Orderic, William said, I persecuted the native inhabitants of England beyond all reason, whether noble or common. I cruelly oppressed them. Many I unjustly disinherited. Innumerable multitudes, especially in the county of York, perished through me by famine and sword. I tremble when I reflect on the grievous sins which burden my conscience, and now about to be summoned before the most awful tribunal of God, I know not what I ought to do. I was bred to arms from my childhood, and am stained with the rivers of blood that I have shed. King William agonized for many weeks as the infection spread through his internal organs. He retained his lucidity until the end and died on September 9th, 1087 at Rouen, about 60 years of age. His money, clothing, furniture, virtually all of his possessions were immediately stolen. His body was left unattended for a time, lying nearly naked on the floor, deserted by the nobles, the clerks, even the servants. His one son, who was present at his death, also left suddenly on personal business. But the story gets even worse. It was finally decided that William would be buried at Caen. That's a city in France. His body was taken to the Abbey Church, unceremoniously in a cart, and it had to wait while the monks there battled a fire. The delayed funeral finally took place. I hope you're all done eating, right? Okay. But William's body had bloated and started to rot. As they tried to stuff his huge corpse into a too small stone coffin, his enormous abdomen burst, causing the few mourners to sicken and quickly flee the putrid stench. Okay, that part's over now. Through the centuries, William's remains have been disturbed many times. Once they were scattered by an angry Calvinist mob in the 16th century. Let me try to catch up. I'm not sure what's going on. We haven't got to that yet. Okay. And once they were thrown in a river during the French Revolution. Finally, one thigh bone was recovered and reburied at Caen. A stone marker there has the Latin inscription, which reads in translation, "Here lies the invincible William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy and King of England, founder of the house, who died in 1087. Okay. William's descendants held on to the throne and still rule England to this day. Now I'm on. Okay? Every English monarch after William is a direct descendant of the Norman-born king, continuing through present times to Queen Elizabeth and King Charles II. In fact, many genealogists maintain over 25% of the present English population, millions of Western Europeans and Americans, all descend from William's Norman line. Of course, the proper name William became quite popular over the centuries. Should William, the current Prince of Wales, succeed his father to the throne, there will one day be another King William of England, William V. Okay, here we go. So now, let me catch up with the slides. There's that King William. That's the accident where he was pummeled by the horn on the saddle. Sorry that they somehow got out of order. That shows where Caen and Bayeux are. Right. They're in the center there. sorry for all the stuff I did. That's when the body was left unattended. And I did not mention, because I was out of order, in 1085, William ordered a great land survey to be done. He wanted to know his kingdom better and be better able to raise revenue through taxation. Every shire was inventoried, listing, in addition to the population, all possessions, livestock, wealth, crops, products, etc. Hardly a single cow or pig was overlooked. This inventory, or early form of census, was called the Doomsday Book. Completed in 1086, it's a compelling record of the lives and times of the 11th century. Okay, so that's the on the marker they have where his surviving bone is buried. Okay. So now we're going to briefly examine the far-reaching results of the Norman conquest. During the ensuing 3 centuries after William, England was greatly and permanently transformed. Politics, economics, schools and universities, law courts, church leadership, proper names, place names, literature, architecture, customs, language, nearly every facet of life was affected, especially the language. The new ruling classes, there we go, good, we're on again. The new ruling classes and aristocrats spoke Norman French. The old Anglo-Saxon English was more closely related to German and was used by the lower common masses who spoke of basic, everyday things. Anglo-Saxon or Germanic English became a lesser, unfashionable language. The more refined or important people spoke French. English absorbed thousands and thousands of new words from Latin-based French. Some estimates maintain 40%, 50%, and some even say 60% of our modern language derived from Anglo-Norman French as a direct result of the conquest of 1066. A quote I found on the internet stated, "The English language and culture would be unrecognizable today if the French had not won the Battle of Hastings." French had become the language of the nobility and of those who wished to please them. King William solidified his power by building castles and installing his own lords into high positions. He also established his clerics in positions of power in the church. Thus, the French noble elite replaced the English upper classes. The middle classes adopted the Norman French language and customs if they wanted to advance their situation and get ahead in life. So England actually used 3 languages at the time. French and Latin were at the top, and Germanic English was a lesser 3rd language in its own country. That situation continued for 3 centuries, as the Norman royal line was followed by the Plantagenet kings, all of whom spoke French. Business and trade relations with the continent, intermarriage between Normans and native English became more and more common. The new dominant language filtered down through society over time. Wine even replaced mead as the beverage of choice. Norman French surnames became common, and masculine first names like William, Henry, Robert, and Richard were popular. countless French terms were used on a regular basis. Some words were a mixture of French and English. For example, the French gent, or gentle, combined with the English man to become gentleman. Of course, over centuries, languages constantly evolve, influenced by historic events and by other languages. New words are added, some fall out of use, spelling and pronunciations change. In the case of English, some words come from French, originally Latin-based, and some come from the German-based Anglo-Saxon. Many everyday words used by the common people are of Germanic origin. Words such as, in the middle there, kalt, warm, heiß. Next line, Wasser. I think you know these, right? What they are in English. Wasser, Wascha, Werk, Sommer, Winter, Kirche, Gott. The common everyday words were the German Anglo-Saxon. Also, immediate family words like Vater, Mutter, Bruder, and Schwester. Those were the family members that they dealt with each and every day. In the 11th and 14th centuries, though, only the privileged classes dealt with extended family, and thus they used words like cousin, tante, oncle, nièce, neveu, grand-père, grand-mère. You see where we get those. The upper classes speaking Norman French employed words used in science, architecture, education, and the arts, as well as the more refined terms for food and professions, the privileged lifestyles. One account that I read stated, the peasants raised and slaughtered the animals, and then the upper classes dined on them. So we get the German word Kuh for the animal, and the French Boeuf, referring to the meat. Or the German words Sau, or Schwein, for pig, versus the French terms for the meat, pork, saucisson, lard, bacon, bacon. Okay. Some examples of English words that have their beginnings in German or Anglo-Saxon compared with Norman French words. I'll bet you can guess a lot of these, and I'm not going to read them all. In the categories of food and drink, we have milk, Bier, Wasser, Apfel, Brot, Butter, Hunger, Durst, Salz, Pfeffer. So those were the words the common masses used, and most of them are German-based. The upper classes, however, on the right, used terms like cuisine, pâtisserie, chef, apéritif, champagne, venaison, restaurant, things like that. Let's get another category. Work and weather. Well, to the lower classes, werk, work, was an important word. And warm, kalt, heiß, cool, for temperatures. Sommer, winter. They knew about summer and winter. The French words, profession, occupation, professeur, docteur, littérature, policier, architecture, and on and on and on. Church terms and nature terms. Kirche and Gott, church and God. The common people use that. And then north, south, east, and west. North, south, est, west, or ost and west. But the more refined terms came from French. Couvent, cathédrale, monastère, illumination, chandelle, prière, fiancé, etc. Home and animals. Of course, the common masses talked about the house and the barn and the garten, and they knew animals like Hund, Katze, pig, Kuh, mouse, verb. The French, however, used maison, appartement, chambre, hôpital, and animals that they sometimes talked about: tigre, zèbre, lion, éléphant, léopard, crocodile, all remaining in our language today. By far the most prominent division between the German-based and the French-based comes in art, education, and science, because the common masses didn't deal with that very much. So they had the word book and lernen, singen, zingen for sing, music, Schule. They had some words for it, but by far the vast amount of words in those fields come from French. Sculpture, orgue, poème, classique, trésor, heraldry, histoire, mathématiques, calculer, littérature, photographie, and on and on and on. Norman French prefixes and suffixes became standard use. Prefixes such as con, dis, ex, pre, and trans, as well as suffixes like able, ance, ment, ism, and tion, were all absorbed into English. Thus, almost every English language word that ends in ment, over 600 of them, had its origin in Norman French. So our current words, argument, moment, government, torment, commencement, cement, entertainment, element, garment, and on and on and on, come from French. Likewise, words that end in ism, over 1,700 of those in our language. Absenteeism, alcoholism, criticism, chauvinism, altruism, baptism, organism, and I could go on and on. And then there's those that end in tion.
Oh my.
Over 4,000 in our current language. Alteration, abortion, addition, attention, affliction, celebration, centralization, classification. You can see the list would go on and on and on. So, in conclusion, every television show or movie you watch, every book or news article you read, every conversation you have during your day, use many English words inherited from the French. The Norman Conquest of England by William the Conqueror in 1066 matters because it changed forever what it means to be English. And now going back to the childhood rhyme we all learned, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But I offer an alternative. William conquered England in 1066, giving English its French language mix.